Hello everyone, welcome to the Debater's Perspective, a program brought to you by Rhetorics, where we interview personalities from across the world and get to discuss global contemporary issues. My name is Eze Nwakuba, founder at Rhetorics. If this is your first time joining us here, please consider subscribing and also sharing this video to your friends as well. This is a program that is initiated to enable debaters find resources on some of the globally trending issues that they usually encounter in debate rooms, but also we use it to bridge the gap between the debate community and the mainstream society that we find ourselves in. As we all know, I'm just going to start off with the preamble, and then I'll be introducing my special guest for today's program. So the preamble. Gun violence is a contemporary global human rights issue. Gun-related violence threatens our most fundamental human right, the right to life. Gun violence is a daily tragedy affecting the lives of individuals around the world. According to Amnesty International, more than 500 people die every day because of the violence committed with firearms. Anyone can be affected by firearm violence, but in certain situations, gun violence disproportionately impacts communities of color, women, and other marginalized groups in society. Today, we're going to be discussing the issue of gun violence, specifically from the perspective of the United States of America, which gives me great pleasure to introduce my guest to you. My guest today is the Director of Speech and Debate at the Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas, United States of America. His name is Dr. Ben Voth. He is an academic expert in debate, argumentation, communication, public speaking, and rhetorics. Dr. Ben Voth has published about 5 books ranging from topics around rhetoric and using rhetoric to also prevent genocide. And his most current book, Debate as a Global Pedagogy, details a variety of efforts globally to combat genocide with debate instruction, while focusing on the unique events of the 1994 Rwandan genocide and the 25-year anniversary debate institute. He helped lead for 400 high school students and more than 50 high school teachers in Rwanda in 2019. Simply put, Dr. Ben Voth is one of the thought leaders when it comes to debate and rhetoric across the world, and has traveled around the world trying to use debate and public speaking as a tool for global development, specifically within the premise of nations in themselves. I'm very pleased to have you on the program today, Dr. Ben Voth. You're very much welcome.
Yeah, very great to be here, Eddie. Thank you so much for having me.
Great, so let's kick right into it. Gun violence, for people who are hearing that for the first time, how would you describe what this means?
Yeah, the scale of the problem, especially in the United States, is pretty massive. And so you can look, when you do debates, at the statistics, and they're fairly overwhelming, just the way that you set up in the preamble, that there are thousands of gun deaths in the United States. A lot of them are suicide-related. In other words, the availability of firearms in homes causes people, when they're having, suicidal ideation, there's the gun. And so that's actually probably one of the most serious aspects, and sometimes it doesn't always get discussed. I personally kind of think this is an interesting topic because it was the first debate topic I did when I was a kid and I learned to debate. I did gun control, and it was a long, long time ago, but it's still a very vexing issue, especially for the United States, because I don't think there's really any doubt that the United States has more guns really per capita than any other country, and so that makes it very interesting. So I'll say that as a starter, but I've certainly got a lot of other things I could say about it, yes.
Great. Just like you mentioned, it has been an age-long debate. Why would you say that we haven't put this debate to rest over the years?
Yeah, I think the simple and direct answer to that question is that there are over 300 million guns in the United States. And so in a conventional debate about gun control, one of the logical things that comes up is, for example, the Australia example. And Australia did a fairly robust job of essentially gathering the firearms in. The United States is so much larger and has so many more guns, and there's so much more passionate attachment to the guns. I think almost anybody inside the political realm of the United States recognizes there's not going to be an Australian style or even some sort of gradual step down. Because when I say that number, 300 million, you also need to understand that gun purchases in the United States for the last 5 years have been exploding, upwards. Like, people are acquiring firearms at rapid exponential levels. And so, in some way, the the debate is almost about maybe trying to reduce public insecurity to the purchase of so many guns, because even the gun buyback programs, I would say, are really a drop in the bucket in terms of just daily sales of firearms in the United States. So when people come to it, I think with good, sincere hearts, I don't know that they completely understand the U.S. popular dynamics surrounding guns. And for me, again, coming from Texas, which, if you know anything about the United States, Texas is kind of the epicenter of sort of gun affection. And, when I have international guests in Texas, they're often sometimes alarmed, but there's a lot of guns in Texas, and that makes it difficult to resolve or propose a plan from a debate standpoint, like, oh, well, we'll just do this. Now, I do think there are things that can be done, but that is why it's sort of difficult to debate and settle.
Good. During the preamble, I did mention that gun violence kind of affects people differently based upon their color and gender. Would you say that there's a vulnerability of people of color or women specifically when it comes to gun violence?
Yeah, I definitely think, especially when it comes to like the suicide issue and even gun accidents in the home, children are super vulnerable. Now, when it comes to race, one of the most interesting things about this issue, and this comes partly because of my civil rights background, is that, and this is again why it's sort of hard to untangle it in the United States, there is a somewhat unique history of trying to deprive African Americans of firearms so as to prevent them from protecting themselves from basically terrorist organizations like the Ku Klux Klan. And actually that sort of emerges into a pretty big debate in the civil rights movement in the 1960s where, and again, I'm a big fan, and I've written about James Farmer Jr. and Martin Luther King and the movement of nonviolence, but there was, even within African American ranks, a disagreement about that, even intimately, such that there was a group called the Deacons of Defense. And these were a group of religious leaders who basically packed guns but would walk around these nonviolent protests to make sure that they were safe. Yeah. And so there is a history of racial discrimination in gun control. And so then that compounds the effort like, what is really going on here in terms of gun violence and things like that. Chicago, for example, where there's a lot of violence with guns against African Americans, has relatively strict gun control laws as urban areas go in the United States. And so it's hard to unpack, there are a lot of black victims of gun violence, but it sometimes looks from a policy standpoint as if the gun control is contributing to that.
Okay, so let's talk about the impact this has on educational systems. I know that recently there was a school shooting which kind of sparked this conversation and made it something was somewhat new. And during those conversations, some political leaders in the US kind of advocated for teachers to own guns and come to school with guns as well. What do you have to say about that?
Well, and an incident that's really critical, and it's from my home state of Texas, this Uvalde incident has really sort of clarified some issues. Now, to my mind, I think the two sort of things that are going to probably come out of that or could come out of that politically are, number one, raising the age of purchase for firearms from 18 to 21. Several states do that. And again, whenever I'm advising debaters about how to plot this stuff out, you have to use the American system of federalism kind of in your favor and look at the different states and see what kind of things are working. And there are states that raise these limits, and even I think in Texas there are some limits like that, but they didn't apply to this particular firearm, the AR-15, that this young person was using inside that school. The other thing, though, and it's kind of in the premise of your question, people will say it's arming the teachers, but Colorado and Ohio have, I think it's called FASTER is the name of the program. They've had it for years. It is voluntary gun training for teachers. And I totally get why people say, don't force me to carry a gun, don't force me to have one. That makes perfect sense. But the truth is, across the United States, there are teachers that would like to carry a gun. And the Uvalde incident, probably to me, part of what's really disturbing is the police standing in the hallway with guns and keeping everybody out while the gunman is for many minutes just killing children and practically protecting the shooter from parents who want to come in. So I think you're going to see those kind of both sides of the aisle coming together, where voluntary gun training for teachers, and then raising the purchase age to 21, because it does seem like a lot of these shooters are kind of like 16 to 21, and there's got to be some better handle on that end.
Okay, great. So if we have teachers, with the training to use firearms, don't you think that this is kind of going to raise the apprehension levels for the kids that are around them? Because beyond the violence, physical violence that guns can inflict on people, there's also research about how the presence of guns around people can have some sort of emotional damage or psychological damage to those individuals. How do you think kids are going to cope having too much guns around their schools?
Yeah, and I do think that since Columbine, which I think was sort of the initial, it was right before the 21st century, but sort of initiated this psychology that we're talking about, I dare say that the Uvalde incident is kind of shifting that paradigm, where, like I'm saying, people with guns are standing in the halls, not engaging the shooter. I think that has got parents and kids scared at a whole nother level. And so, and I do think, at least, from the Texas point of view, there are families that want to defend their kids, and there are teachers that want to defend the kids and things like that. And so I think the panic that you're talking about, it is so high in the United States just from the past 10 years that this Uvalde incident has sort of shifted that paradigm further, where and there were things like where a mother came in and rescued her child after she had been arrested by the police and things like that. And the person that ended up shooting the shooter was in a barber shop and grabbed a gun and came in. And so I think people are thinking, if there was someone more available on site, apparently there was a hired gun literally on the campus, but he was off campus, and it was sort of a strange thing about that. So and both the Colorado and Ohio model have empirical success where there are fewer school shootings and things like that. So to my mind, as a debate coach, I always kind of shop the federal system. In Ohio and Colorado, voluntary training, not mandatory. And you're not trying to psych everybody out. I do think that putting up signs and being all ominous about it is probably not good for the kids and unhealthy and that kind of thing. But I don't know if we fully understand how terrified these kids are after Uvalde. They really are, and it's a different thing where it's the authorities didn't do what they were supposed to do. Now what?
Okay, great. So just to put you on the spotlight a little bit, there's a huge divide in the U.S. about what the solution should be. While I think the Conservative Party is more interested in having more people have guns, those on the liberal side of things kind of believe that we should, reduce the number of guns that people have, or probably even pass stricter gun, laws across the states. Where do you stand on that divide?
Yeah, and I don't mind saying what I think about it, even though you're totally right about the premise of it. And it's interesting to me, it's kind of personal in the way that, it's kind of strange because I have never fired a firearm. I've never owned a firearm, and I always feel a little funny in Texas that I'm kind of that way. But at the same time, I do think the Second Amendment to the Constitution, it says that is correct. The other thing that's sort of intimate and interesting to me is that in 2015, Texas passed a pretty, doing the way you're saying, the conservatives what's called an open carry law, where people can carry. That law required that state universities allow guns onto their campus. Now, within the law in 2015, private universities like where I work had the option. And so, but the legislation literally said, and you'll find this interesting, I think, that there should be a debate on the campus, and then a policy should be set. And so we literally had a debate. And our student body in the debate was kind of about 50-50 on it in Texas. But I honestly feel, and the university ruled not to have guns on the campus. So at SMU, you're not allowed to open carry like at the University of Texas there. I'll be honest, I feel less safe because of that. I would rather, again, almost like the proposal I was saying, and there have been some talks in the Student Senate about this, that people who want to would be trained and able to carry on the campus. To me, and there is evidence for this from a guy named John Lott that says that these shooters are looking for places where they know there are no rival guns. And that's where the thing, like if the United States were just kind of to dwindle down to a few guns, as it went to that, the shooters, with whatever madness, would pick targets where the guns have been banned. And so I have to admit, I would rather have people having proper access. Now, again, I'm not a fan of like people having guns without training and things like that, but because there's so many guns, especially in Texas and things like that, I'd rather good people be there. And I think even with what people say about Uvalde, I think ultimately it was a good guy with a gun who resisted the local police and went in and shot the shooter. So yeah, I kind of come down and what I think is identified as the more conservative side, like, okay, let there be some guns that are able to engage the shooter. So, yeah.
Okay, so how then do you think, away from the United States now, because the United States is more or less like a global leader, and so oftentimes there are a lot of countries that want to copy things that are being done in the United States. Specifically, when you have the United States being largely in support of people carrying firearms, it means that the global trade of firearms would definitely go up in itself. How do you think this is going to impact every other part of the world, specifically areas that are very unstable, like in Nigeria, for example, we are beginning to have higher issues of church shootings or school shootings and stuff like that?
Yeah, no. I think that's very interesting and worth thinking about. And again, partly in my latest book dealing with the issue of Rwanda, I dare say that in the case of Rwanda, where there were a lot of killings with blunt instruments and like machetes and things like that, and working in country 2017, 2019, there was some discussion in country, and I don't think it was the irrational that was like, hey, we should allow guns in Rwanda because that might deter and stop the escalating violence with blunt instruments and things like that. And there were, some very strange situations at the outset of 1994 in the first 100 days, well, the 100 days that the whole thing took place, where maybe if more force could have been applied to the Hutu militias, they wouldn't have just sort of frothed over into the kind of madness. So there's that possible modeling. The other thing about what you're saying, like gun trafficking internationally, like strangely the United States has been involved in strategies of like gun trafficking to like Mexican cartels in order to catch them with the illegal weapon. But then ironically, those guns are used against like people in the United States and Texas and things like that. So I think people probably need to be able to defend themselves. Another thing that you might want to know is that the United States, when it went into Iraq, it had kind of a pro-gun message where each household was told to keep a firearm because the United States military didn't want to have to defend every house. And they tried to say, look, you should be prepared to defend your own home. So, yeah, there is an American model, but there's a bunch of risk with it, too. Like, if it were to be done in Japan or some of these places where there's zero firearms, I think you would find, deleterious effects that were pretty noxious. But where you have unstable potential violence, I actually think you might be able to improve deterrence locally and stop a Rwandan genocide or even a Yugoslavian genocide kind of in its tracks before it gets all the way to 1 million people or whatever.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Prof, for all these answers. I'm going to put you on the spot one last time after I talk about the people that have supported us today. So after I'm done, I'm going to ask you you're a debate coach, so you oftentimes set resolutions. So if you were an Arch Corps member at a tournament and you needed to set a debate resolution about this issue, what would that resolution be? But before you answer that, I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us for this particular episode, and I'd specifically like to give a shout out to Adeso Development Initiative who have filmed this specific episode for us. And we're live at Abakaliki also, where we are with the Global Great Debaters Nigeria, and where we had to train teachers as well. We like to say, if you're here, if you're just joining us for the first time, please consider subscribing to this channel and also share or like this video as well, and do not forget to follow us on our social media handles as well. All our partners for this particular episode, we're also going to link their social media channels in the description below. So back to you, Prof. What exactly would be your ideal motion or resolution?
Yeah, actually a lot of really great resolutions come to my mind. I mean, of course, first of all, I would kind of explore that two-pronged answer that I was saying. I'd like to have a resolution that kind of has a left-right solution in it, which includes like, should we raise the gun age to 21? and should we make voluntary training of teachers available? And I think that would be interesting to kind of see debaters interact, because in the United States, there's a massive partisan divide about these things. But I also would be willing to do resolution with just one of each, and then that would be good. I also think just a straight up like Second Amendment debate, like should the Supreme Court limit the Second Amendment right to bear arms? I think that's a good resolution. So those four jump into my head right away, and I think those would be good, solid things to debate, both in the U.S. and maybe even internationally.
Thank you very much, Prof. It has really been a great pleasure having you here in Nigeria and also donning the attire of the Igbo people.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. And with that, we come to the end of this particular episode of the Debater's Perspective. Thank you very much for watching up until this point, and we'll see you at the next one.